up via our connections to, no worries, via our connections to PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, and Zelle. So really soup to nuts, we kind of handle all of the stress that comes with talking to your co-parent about money, from proposing individual expenses, as I mentioned, that usually happens 4 to 6 times a month via text, or otherwise once a month via spreadsheet for most folks, either during the divorce process or after. And then we handle everything through to settling those expenses, recording that everything was settled, and everything is then consolidated in the app, so you could export it if ever needed for going back into court or for sharing something with your ex or proving something. We handle kind of that whole entire process.
I love it. I think that's great. And I'd like to back up a little bit. So here's often what I see. So as most of you know, I litigated divorces for many, many, many years. I mediated them, negotiated them, helped with every type of divorce, from the most amicable with no assets and very little in support, all the way up to $20 million estates. And what I see most often, when something goes wrong, so not in all divorces, but when something goes wrong, is that when you contemplated what was going to be in your divorce agreement, you didn't necessarily really talk about these add-on expenses, these expenses that are different from child support. So one thing that I always recommend is for you to contemplate that as you're negotiating the terms of your divorce. You won't be able to anticipate every single expense, but there are things, I mean, you know your children, right? There are things that you expect will likely come up. As Jacqueline mentioned, medical expenses and co-pays, extracurricular activities, uniforms, school lunches, there's, trips, field trips. There's so many things that come up because kids are super expensive. And so to the extent that you can list out some of them and how those expenses will be shared is really helpful. And for some families, it's 50-50. For some, it might be 70-30. My question to you, Jacqueline, is if the expenses, there's an agreement or a court order that the expenses will be shared at, like, let's say 60-40, is that something that you can use your act to do, or do you have to have an equal split?
Oh, absolutely. We accommodate every single split down to the decimal level. So if you even have like 67.73 as your split, we can support it. And actually have long conversations about rounding in our team, and how should we even do down to the decimal level of rounding to enable co-parents to support any type of agreement that they have in place. And every expense can be split in a custom way. So even if you have a default split of 70-30, but you agreed this one would be split 50-50, every single expense has the ability to modify how that particular one is split. Co-parents can even go back and negotiate using our app. So if one proposed it at 50-50 and the other one thinks that should be 70-30 because it's part of a category they might have discussed, they can say, hey, this should be 70-30 in a comment on the expense. Propose the new split, and the other party can go ahead and accept that if they agree to it. So we definitely facilitate not only decimal level splits, but negotiation on those splits. And okay, Erin, you're exactly right, by the way. So the number one category we see run through our app is medical bills, followed by extracurriculars, which are the two biggest categories of spend that fall outside of child support.
Got it. Okay, so the other problem that I see a lot is that it is very, very hard to enforce reimbursement of expenses. And so a lot of times, if they're not clearly defined, or maybe they are clearly defined, but your ex is not paying their fair share, I've had people in the past come to my law practice and say, okay, I need to go to court because I need to be able to get reimbursed. And when you do the cost benefit analysis of how much it costs to have a lawyer versus what they haven't paid, then sometimes it doesn't make sense to go to court right in that moment, but you might want to wait over time. And then I see people come and they've got 200 emails, spreadsheet that's been modified a bunch of times. And we have this really big problem, which is how do we get all that evidence before a judge, and how do we even get it in as evidence? And so one thing I like about tracking expenses, particular with your app, is that like everything is in one place. So it doesn't just like benefit the communication, like the relationship between the two of you, but it also can keep both of you really accountable to each other, and ultimately to the court if you end up having, or a mediator if you end up having to get some help to resolve some of these issues. Is that how you anticipated like this being used as well? Or did you think, no, this really is only best for like the most amicable of relationships?
No, actually, we intentionally have built the app thinking about supporting cases from the most amicable relationships to the most contentious, and building features that suit that entire suite of relationships. And kind of going back to what you said about how difficult it is to figure out expenses after the fact. One thing that I highly recommend, especially if you're early on in the divorce process, is using something like Onward while you're still in that process to capture what you're spending on your kids. Because otherwise, you can set this agreement in place, but then you'd still find yourself potentially arguing about things like medical or extracurricular out after the fact. What we would recommend people do is actually download the app now, even if you use it on your own, and start putting in all the expenses that you have on your kids. And you can categorize every expense so that you could see, let's say, over 3 months of use, if you're still negotiating your agreement with your ex, how much money you spent on medical on average, how much you spent on extracurricular on average, and working those into the agreement so that they don't become a point of argument later, or at least working out how those will be split. So saying, okay, fine, we might not include medical expenses as part of something that's child support related, but every time we have medical expenses, they are on average $300 a month, and those will be split 50-50 or 70-30, or whatever that may be. So that kind of helps avoiding the conflict down the road. But if you do see that conflict coming up down the road, and Erin, as you mentioned exactly, that people struggle getting their ex to pay them back, one thing that we really try to do is automate reminders. So that if there's an expense outstanding, we will send your ex a notification saying, hey, you still owe for this $40 for your summer camp or for soccer practice. Try to settle that expense before the end of the month. A lot of the reasons that people don't like to get paid back is they might not like the communication, the friction. They're using it kind of as a power lever against their ex. And our thought with building Onward was that we've created an entity that's neutral. So you can't really get upset at the app for reminding you that you've owed money, where you could potentially get upset with your ex. So we help to ease that tension by being that neutral party going out to both co-parents. And then, yes, as you mentioned, we actually, every single piece of communication in the app, every expense is recorded, and then can be exported if you ever need it into Excel. And we have plans down the road to even create an export function that could be permissible in court. But all of that helps keep records. If somebody didn't pay for something, if somebody entered an expense and was never reimbursed, we can help support you in proving that never happened with the records in our app.
Okay, that's great. That's really helpful. So there are definitely expenses that the court expects you to share, right? Like in most states, it doesn't necessarily need to be 50-50, but in most states, when it comes to, if you both agree for private schooling, for example, if you both agree to that, there's an expectation that you will share that expense. With medical, unreimbursed medical expenses, there is the expectation that will be shared. With agreed upon extracurricular activities, or maybe extracurricular activities that your child was already participating in before the divorce, that is generally expected that you'll share. But then there's like all these other like gray areas that come up that I thought might be helpful to address. And I see if you have any questions, please share them along the way and we'll try to address all of them. So one household might value or have the ability to pay for something more than the other. So things like electronics, for example, you might want your child to have an iPad, your ex doesn't. In that scenario, unless there's an agreement, the court is likely not going to order the other spouse or the ex-spouse to share that expense. So understand that there are, generally speaking, mandatory add-on expenses, things that the court almost always would expect that you share, like the medical. Then there are discretionary expenses that that are sometimes shared, other times not. And I would just say, when you're negotiating your divorce agreement, use your common sense here. What would a neutral third party, what would a judge likely say about, SAT prep? Do they still do SATs? I'm so old now, I don't even remember, but assuming that they do,
I think
what would the court likely say there, right? Likely say that something like that would be shared. But when it comes to like electronics or like new fancy shoes, then that probably would be discretionary. The court likely would say, no, you don't have to share. However, again, if you have that agreement, if you've agreed to do it either forever or at least now, then that can be put in the app, because if there's an agreement, then that can go in there, and that's a great way to track things.
Yeah, actually, just on that, I would say that one of the things we find causes the most arguments is that people usually only discuss expenses after the fact. And by after the fact, I mean after the purchase has been made, money's out the door. And once money's out the door, it becomes really hard to resolve those conflicts, particularly if you might have had a different idea on how much money should be spent. Let's say, for example, you want to get a new pair of soccer cleats for your kids, and one parent thinks that the budget should be up to 120, the other one thinks it should be no more than $40, but then one person went out and spent 120 and only told the other person after the money has been spent, and at that point it's one of these discretionary items, and there's no forcing function for how they should agree to it. Then what we can do to solve that in our app is we have a proposals feature, which enables co-parents to propose an expense in the future and say, hey, I'm looking at buying these soccer cleats for our kids. They cost $120. I think we should split it 50-50. Are you willing to participate? Yes or no? And at that point, the person can come back with, say yes, or they can put in a comment like, hey, I'm only comfortable spending up to 40, and then I will split it 50-50 with you. And facilitating all of that, it sounds kind of like a conversation, but it's pretty automated in the app through notifications. Facilitating those types of conversations ahead of time can be really helpful at preventing arguments, because the two parties can actually come to an agreement before the money is spent.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great feature. Question, let's say the agreement is that I will contribute $100, but I need to do it in payments. Is that a possibility? Can you do it in payments?
Not today, but that's definitely something that
Okay.
we have on our roadmap to support in the future. We actually have customer service inbound tickets coming in, people looking for that type of functionality. So we absolutely will support that in the future.
Awesome. Tell me about the features and you already have maybe addressed all or some, but the features that you most love about that.
Yeah. Definitely the proposals feature that I just mentioned, that we feel very strongly that it helps avoid arguments. The ability to add a receipt to every single expense is something we really believe in to create transparency and trust. We also enable you to upload photos. We've heard from users that they love the idea of being able just to share milestones in their child's life with their ex in a way that might not be texting them a photo, but you can do it. Say, hey, you agree to buy something for your kids, and then you can actually add a photo and share that moment with your co-parent. We have a reporting feature, which we're incredibly proud of, that enables co-parents to see how much they spent by month, by child, and by category. Many of our co-parents tell us it's the first time they've ever seen how much they're spending on their kids and where those dollars are going, and have been able to make decisions based on that. Yeah, our export feature, something that people use, as I mentioned, either to have a record of everything, but even just for their own finances. We've got a co-parent who downloads them every month, plays around with them, categorizes things in Excel, and he just loves to go into the details. So yeah, I think those are some of the main features. Kind of the bread and butter of the app is a very clear homepage where you can see exactly who owes who for what, and sort of a list of unsettled expenses that you've got like 5 expenses you need to clear out to get to what we call kind of inbox zero, and be at even with your ex. And so we try to make it super simple and easy for people to propose expenses, settle them, and have everything really clear and placed in the app.
That makes a lot of sense. I love the idea of using it to help budget your expenses for like the kids going forward. I mean, similar to how we would budget for running our own businesses or, our daily lives. But I think sometimes like, we've got expenses everywhere. It sort of just blends into everything else. And when we're moving from one household into two, things are tighter and they're harder, and it's harder to identify what we can afford and like budget ahead of time. And so I like I love that. I also love the idea of talking about these expenses before they come up. Like, we know that for the summer, we're going to have to figure out something for our kids, whether that be childcare, whether it be summer camp, but we have to figure that out and start like talking about it now. Can we use the app to communicate about that expense, even if we don't know exactly what it's going to be yet, just so that we have everything related to money in one place?
Yeah, absolutely. Every single expense has its own chat function. We did that on purpose so that people didn't have to pull out and communicate via text message, but you can keep communications very tight to one particular topic. So you could create an expense saying like summer camp, where you don't know exactly where you're sending your kids yet, but you can put it in at roughly $1,000 and say, this is what it's going to cost, and then go back and forth in the comments. We're huge believers in this because oftentimes, because people don't want to talk to their ex, they might avoid the communication that's needed to plan for the future. And we believe that by preempting those conversations, enabling people to plan for things in the future, both parties can start saving today for something that might even be 3 months down the road. And we can facilitate those conversations, even if people don't want to have them via text message.
Got it.
One thing that's important to remember is that I would say of the co-parents that are on our platform, over 90% of them are transitioning to using Onward from text messages or emailed spreadsheets. And just to kind of think about some of the pain points that come up through this process is, of course, when you're texting with someone, it's very easy for things to kind of step on a landmine, use the wrong word, and things to turn into an argument. When you're using Excel, it's hard to see when you're sending versions back and forth who might have changed something. If you want to attach a receipt, you can't do that. So we're really solving for a lot of kind of those basic pain points that text messages and spreadsheets were just not built for, in terms of enabling two people to communicate without friction, provide evidence, and even negotiate on back and forth on these expenses.
I think that's really important to bring up, that the lack of friction, but also just the pain points that you're trying to help people avoid. A lot of customers have told me that it's really distracting to be in the middle of your day, either like you're with your kids or you're working, and to get text messages from your ex about the divorce or about expenses. You feel like you have to respond right away, which isn't always the best idea, especially if we're in a heightened state of emotion, or you feel like, and you do forget if you hold off doing it. But sometimes just like in those early days, just getting a text feels really triggering. It might be fairly benign, like, hey, can you make sure to reimburse me for childcare this month? But it doesn't oftentimes feel that way. So I really like compartmentalizing it, like saying to myself, I'm going to check the Onward app, twice a day, once a day, 3 times a week. Even better, like bonus points, if you all are able to communicate with your co-parent, hey, I will get back to you within 48 hours, or like some sort of indication about how often you'll be on that app. But to be able to set those boundaries with your ex and with yourself, so you're not constantly thinking and worrying, when am I going to hear next? How am I going to deal with this? I think is great. I love that. I don't know if that was something you were considering as you were building it out. Okay.
Absolutely. Actually, our hope is that you don't need to even set a cadence with which you check the app. It shouldn't be something like you need to go in there every 2 days or every week. We use our notifications to let people know when anything has changed, when there's anything new that requires their attention. That's if a new expense came in, if their ex tried to modify one of the splits and wanted to propose a new split. So we send you the notification. If you want to go in immediately, you can. If you want to set for yourself that you only go in once a week, if you didn't get a notification, there's nothing for you to do. If you did, you can just choose to go in once a week. And the other issue we find with text messages is not only how triggering it is, which we do hear across the board, but also things just get lost. So if you got a text message about a new expense at 3 o'clock, but at 7:30, somebody asked you to switch custody days for your kids, then it's like the end of the day, you're exhausted, you're a parent. It's really easy to forget that somebody asked you about an expense earlier. It might not even be malicious that you forgot. It's just like got lost in the shuffle. And that's also the benefit of having everything really consolidated in one central place.
Got it. Okay, I love that. I'm going to ask the questions that I think people might be thinking. And again, if you're worried about confidentiality or anonymity, you're welcome to just like send a question to me directly. It doesn't have to be in the chat with everyone. But here's something we see a lot of with Hello Divorce, because most of our customers are trying to and do resolve their divorce outside of court and without like lawyering up in that traditional sense. Oftentimes they might agree to a child support amount, but decide that it's not going to go through the state, right? We're just going to transfer it like back, like I'll pay it each month directly to you. We don't have to worry about any delay. We don't have to get the state or the county involved. And I love that. Although what I remind people is that child support laws are major, right? If you miss your child support payment, so like over time or are consistently late, in many states, there's no statute of limitations on when your ex can come back at you and request back support and back interest. So that is a long way of saying it is super important to track. No cash payments, please. Like very, very, very important to track. Another thing about child support is that if you don't pay, and if you really can't for whatever reason, then you have to modify that agreement or get a new order so that you change the amount. Otherwise, your ex can come back later and ask for the whole amount, even if during a time period you had lost your job or some major life event came up. One more example is with child support is that if you don't pay consistently, there's lots of power that the state has to punish you. You can be held in contempt. You could, lose your driver's license. I mean, everything. So this is a long way of saying how important it is to track it. And I'm wondering could we use the app like as a line item to just say like every month you'll pay me $1,000, $200, $50 in child support. And that way we're tracking the payments as they come through. Is that
Absolutely.
a reasonable way to use it?
Absolutely. Okay. So we have child support as one of our categories in the app.
Great.
So you could actually put in what looks like a normal expense, but you tag it as child support, and it looks like you've got your child support payment also running through the app. And what's really great about our app is that we actually enable co-parents to note how the expense was taken care of. So every expense also has the payment method next to it. So if you pay via bank transfer, you could say child support was paid via bank transfer on X date, or via Venmo or PayPal or whatever it might be. So we not only track child support, but also how it was paid, and so that everything can be tracked and reconciled using the Onward app.
Awesome. I'm putting this back up here because we're getting closer to the end. Good. I probably should have just asked you that before I went into this long reason as to why, but that's so great to hear.
Yeah. And also what's unfortunate is that so many couples don't have child support put into place. My research shows that actually more than half of divorces don't have a child support payment in place. And that means that every single expense is up for negotiation, which makes this problem kind of twice as painful. Mm-hmm. Child support covering kind of food, shelter, and clothing actually is only 53% of the cost of raising a child per the USDA in terms of how money is spent on children. And so there's still that 47% that's not covered by it that people are arguing about. But if you don't have child support, then it's really 100% of that pie. And so just something to keep in mind as you're figuring out whether or not to put a child support payment in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just asked a question about whether or not we should have either a written agreement on either child support and or these expenses if we get along pretty well and we've never really had issues. And my answer would be yes, absolutely. It's always great to have a default. Again, you can change the agreement on specific expenses, but the default's really important because our lives are going to become more complex, right? Like either or both of us might find ourselves in relationship again. We might have another child. We might have stepchildren. Lots of pressures there for how you're going to pay expenses and whether or not your new partner wants you to pay X, Y, or Z. So it's kind of like a prenuptial agreement or a postnuptial agreement. Same thing with a divorce agreement in an uncontested world, because you want to use it kind of like an insurance policy. It's there if we need it. This will be our default. We can always change it. But if there's ever disagreement, we can always go back to what we initially agreed on.
100%. I couldn't agree more.
Awesome.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And even better
you.
is if you've got a record of like what you've been spending for the last several months, just so that it's not only theoretical, but actually like, hey, on average, this is what we've been spending on our kids for the last few months. And this is what we should expect roughly going forward.
Great. Okay. A couple last questions. We have a lot of very like design friendly people in our community, business owners, independent contractors, a lot of people doing really interesting, fun stuff. And so I think it would be great if you can kind of share like either like the ultimate vision for this product, where it's headed, or maybe something about your mission or how like the brand plays a role in co-parenting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, starting with the brand, for me, it's been absolutely critical to our mission that we build a brand that changes the narrative around what does it mean to be a co-parent in America, even using the term co-parenting to normalize it. And really, I think there's always somewhat been a bit of a stigma in the past around divorce, which is really not relevant in today's world where it's so common. There should be no stigma against it anymore. And not only that, it should be something that people are kind of thinking about optimistically and even celebrating that next stage of life, the bond with their children, moving forward if they have children in their divorce process. So everything that we put out on our brand is super optimistic, empowering. We create a lot of content on our blog for co-parents to help with tips and tricks for kind of that next stage of life and going through the divorce process and figuring out life post-divorce, incorporating a new partner, etc. But all of that is built in a really light, optimistic and empowering tone, because we really feel it's our responsibility to support co-parents in that next step of their journey.
That's one of the things I love most about you and what you are doing, because so many of the customers we have coming to Hello Divorce are the same type of people that would have come to our law firm or other law firms, and yet they're able to resolve their differences without spending thousands and thousands of dollars and going to court. And I think a big reason for it is how they are approaching it and how we are able to help support them in that, because like it's not all doom and gloom. Something that I love most about our divorced customers is that they're so alive, like they're like interested in self-growth and what will my next chapter be. They're not just letting life pass them by. And that is, that's amazing. I love that.
Thank you.
Anything else on the brand and the vision?
Yeah. So the vision, well, firstly, kind of closing out mission has always been to help reduce tension among co-parents, improve their lives, and then thus create happier homes for the next generation. But in terms of product expansion, our vision has always been to be hyper-focused on the financial aspect of co-parenting. We thought that would be more powerful to have a destination where you manage finances for the family than handling every single part of the divorce process, which could be managing custody calendars, etc. And that's really because it does tend to be the number one cause of arguments among co-parents. So in terms of our product vision, it's really to be a hub for managing the finances of co-parenting situations. It's the everyday expense tracking, which we do right now. We've got some really interesting work coming up on debit cards, so shared debit cards where co-parents could
I love that.
You could actually split expenses at the point of transaction. so that one person doesn't always need to upfront the money and then ask to be repaid or even float that money for 30 days.
Oh, Jacqueline, you have to tell me when you do that, because most of our providers, like childcare providers, won't take 2 payments. They'll only take one. But asking for it and then asking for reimbursement is so much harder than if we both are able to like pay our portion directly to the provider. So very excited. Also, and I'll let you finish, I promise, but how much does it cost to use the app?
To use the app, actually absolutely free. Yes,
Okay.
The app is absolutely free to use today. It's always been part of our mission to get it in the hands of as many co-parents as possible and help empower you on your journey. So go ahead and download us today in the App Store, completely free. And then in terms of how we look down the road, we'll always have a base free product and then have value added services that are paid for. So that would be an example of that. Could be the debit card that I just mentioned. We're incredibly excited about that, really revolutionizing all of the challenges that co-parents face when it comes to upfronting the money, communicating about money, and taking care of all of it at the point of transaction. From there, we're looking at some savings products that will enable co-parents to save for milestones in their child's life, things like college, summer camp, and braces. It's one thing to talk to an ex and say, hey, are you saving for braces? But then you don't know whether or not they're putting that money away. Our app can facilitate full transparency. So you get a notification every time your ex puts money away to really take that worry off of your plate and know that the children of divorced parents are being taken care of in the same way as those who could have conversations about money every day around the dinner table. So it's our responsibility to help facilitate that for our users and just really be a trusted partner in managing finances in every aspect of the co-parenting relationship.
Oh my gosh, I'm a big fan over here, and you might not know this, but it's really hard to pique my interest like this. So I love what you're doing and where you're headed. Before we close out, I just want to remind everyone, well, first of all, you can go to onwardapp.com. You can also, I would think, go to the App Store.
Yep, go to the App Store, type in Onward co-parenting. You should find us really quickly.
Great. And if you are in the divorce process or considering divorce, we do have free a 15-minute call that you can sign up for to learn more about what our options are, how we might be able to help. We also have a great promo code for March, which is $100 off any Hello Divorce plan. So the average divorce costs over $17,000 per person, which is insane. Our plans range from $99 to $3,800. The $3,800 and our $2,500 products include both spouses. For any of the plans that involve a human, not just software, so that's pro or above, we're offering $100 off. So I hope this has been really helpful for everyone. I know I'm really excited to see where, already excited about what Jacqueline's doing, but to see how the story unfolds. If they want to contact the app or you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, feel free to reach out to us at support@onwardapp.com. We're happy to answer any questions that you have. And I would love to see you on the platform and hopefully can provide a lot of value as you're figuring out your finances with your co-parent. And Erin, couldn't be honestly more impressed by everything you've built at Hello Divorce and your mission. The cost of $17,000 per person is exorbitant and preventative for most couples in the United States. So I couldn't be a bigger fan of what you've done to really democratize access to facilitating a great divorce process. And I'm super grateful to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here. Really appreciate it. You're always welcome to email me at erin@hellodivorce.com or hello@hellodivorce.com or hit us up on our chat bot. We're here to help. We're here as a resource. That's like in our DNA, both Jacqueline and I. So if you have questions, let us help answer them, or at least get you to the right resource or person too. And yeah, have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks so much, Erin. Take care.